You've painted up your lips and rolled and curled your tinted hair. Ruby, are you contemplating going out somewhere?
Not so long ago, we used to get our fun and thrills at freak shows at the fair. Just a glance at the bearded lady or the elephant man, and most people would trot home, feeling smug and thinking themselves lucky. Of course, now that we're more sophisticated and sensitive to civil rights, we go to the cinema instead. Yet, as a disabled person watching films, I've become painfully aware of assumptions in the way reality is portrayed, which are so ingrained that it's time they were challenged. I'm talking about what I call body fascism, the politics of aesthetics behind the bodies we see on the screen, the visual and narrative metaphors which would have us believe that to be a person of any worth, not only have you got to be beautiful, you've got to be physically perfect. In the world of Hollywood, appearance is everything. Beautiful and handsome movie stars are the good guys. The rest of us, especially if we're in wheelchairs or maimed in any way, are plain bad and ugly, or worse, sinister. Take, for example, the dramatic revelation of Dr. Blofeld's face in You Only Live Twice, when his deformity is linked to his evil genius.
You made a mistake, my friend. No astronaut would enter the capsule carrying his air conditioner. Remove his helmet. James Bond, allow me to introduce myself. I am Ernst Stavro Blofeld. They told me you were assassinated in Hong Kong.
Yes, this is my second life.
You only live twice, Mr. Bond.
In movies, villainy, like the Mark of Cain, shows. Dr. No had prosthetic hands, and Scaramanga in The Man with a Golden Gun, 3 nipples. And if Kevin Costner thought he was being right on with Dances with Wolves, he blew it with Waterworld by giving his arch-villain a disability, namely one eye. What a cliche. You'd think crime prevention would be easy. Put everyone with a different sort of body behind bars.
Well, I think that when you're looking for evil, and criminologists and policymakers are doing it as well, you're looking for it as located in a place. So we look at mental illness as a place that can give us the justification for crime. We look at genetics. I mean, there's a search now for the criminal gene as a way of locating evil in a thing, so that what would happen then if we could actually isolate that gene? Could we eliminate it? Would we really eliminate evil? And film, many films were about the battle between good and evil. So what better thing to do was to embody it in a very visual kind of way, so that we know when we hear the music, when we see the face, that that's a bad guy.
The makers of Bond movies have for a long time used very simple characterizations. Often the bad one, the head of Smirsh or whatever it is, has a disfigurement of one sort or another. But here the change in the GoldenEye film, the change of one character from being a goodie to being a baddie, was associated with the scarring of his face. And we felt that had gone just one stage too much.
Well, if one is to look at the crime across the board, both in terms of violent crime and other kinds of theft and fraud, what people will say is that the person who committed this crime looks relatively normal. They wear a suit. They go to work every day. Most women and children are at risk to people that they know, mostly men that they know, whom they live with in their own homes. Most of us are more at risk from fraud, from consumer goods, faulty goods, so that actually what we're most at risk to is the things that we most trust.
And yet, in all the Batman films, most of the bad guys, based on comic strip characters created in the late 30s, are congenitally deformed or disfigured. Take the Joker, for example. After an accident in a vat of acid, his psychotic ambition is to remake the world in his own image. So much so that he mutilates those around him, as we see in this scene.
We mustn't compare ourselves to regular people. We're artists. For instance, let me challenge you with a little piece I did. Bob, Alicia, you will take pictures and record my work. You will join me in the avant-garde of the new aesthetic.
Jack, you said I could watch you improve the paintings.
Oh, I'm in trouble now.
Why is she wearing a mask?
Well, she's just a sketch, really. Alicia, sit down. Show the lady why you wear the mask. You see, Miss Vale, Alicia's been made over in line with my new philosophy, so now, like me, she's a living work of art.
I must say I was amused to start with by the brilliance of the acting. But then it started to dawn on me that somehow this acid attack, which had caused the disfigurement to the Joker, had also, or was implied, that it had also warped his personality. And we were expected to feel scared. And I thought, no, wait, here we're sending out all these messages about how disfigurement is a scary thing, which we should back away from. And I immediately start thinking of children that I know and young teenagers who are trying to face the world with their disfigurement, and I know that they will be experiencing the name-calling associated with that film.
But it's only make-believe, isn't it? No one in their right mind could take Harvey Two-Face in Batman Forever as a serious comment on disability, could they? But then why did the makers of the film go to such lengths to choreograph a scene which dramatically links the unscarred side of Harvey's face to the colour white, while the other side is portrayed as dark, demonic, predatory?
The bat's stubborn refusal to expire is driving us insane!
Don't worry, baby.
You'll kill him soon.
Besides, I made your favorite tonight. Sparkling champagne and yummy poached salmon with little itty-bitty quail eggs and a creamy, dreamy lemon souffle.
No, I made your favorite. A charred heart of black boar, a side of raw donkey meat.
The Harvey Two-Face character in the third Batman movie is dreamt up from the start with absolutely no attempt to put him in context. He's just seen as the demonic lunatic in Gotham City. And I think it's a very easy way for filmmakers to characterize the evil, the bad, the criminal. And because of it, they seem to rely, and I'm sure the Batman movies are not the only ones, in fact I know they aren't, to rely on these very simple black and white images.
I would argue that cinema defines the boundaries of normality and decency, and to some extent civilization. And the way it does that in its extremes with disabled characters is that you have the bad on the one edge, the kind of the Bond characters with disabilities, all of those kind of things, Batman's foes and whatever. And then you have the Supercrip on the other side, like Christy Brown or Douglas Bader in Reach for the Sky. And there's numerous examples of that, predominantly people with cerebral palsy, it seems, or amputations. But the point is that they're the extremes, and it's not saying you should be this or you should be that, although it is saying you shouldn't be evil, but we know you're not going to be a Supercrip. So it's defining a middle road that is to be advocated for all normal, average, ordinary people.
So, to be a hero with a less than perfect body, you've got to become Supercrip. You've got to triumph against the odds, overcoming any difficulties to be as normal as possible. It makes everyone feel better, and it gets everyone off the hook, because it's all up to you. You can see this in a scene from My Left Foot, when the filmmakers show us that Christy Brown is as intelligent as everyone else.
Jesus suffering Christ. He's a brown. He's a brown, all right. Christy's a brown. Coat.
Where are you going, buddy?
What do you think? This man deserves a jar.
The Supercrip model gives able-bodied people the feeling that it is possible for disabled people to overcome their difficulties if they try hard enough, if they have the courage. So that the condition of disabled people generally is the responsibility of disabled people, and that's the implicit message, that everyone could do it if this character could do it.
I find it really insulting and patronising when heroism is portrayed as overcoming disability. Most heroes are remembered for what they've accomplished, not the limitations of their bodies. Take Attila the Hun, for example. Did you know he was a dwarf? Or that Gramsci, the Marxist theorist, had stunted growth and was a hunchback? President Kennedy had severe curvature of the spine and lived in constant pain. Yet we don't remember any of these men for their disabilities. And what's worse, when a disabled hero hits the screen, he's invariably played by an able-bodied actor. How else can they show off their talent? In the past 10 years, 7 Oscars have been won by actors playing disabled characters. Dustin Hoffman in Rain Man, Al Pacino in Scent of a Woman, and Tom Hanks in Forrest Gump. Only one of the winners, Marlee Matlin in Children of a Lesser God, was disabled. There's a steady market in pretending to be disabled if it'll win you a prize. Yet none of these actors would black up to play Steve Biko. They wouldn't dare.
I think disabled actors will never get to play the big roles, even if the character is disabled, for a couple of reasons. Mainly because entertainment works by offering the viewer a simplistic world with a happy ending. If a character has a disability, and he really has that disability, the audience are going to leave thinking, my God, he's got to live with that even outside of the screen. And I think the cinema needs the relief that it's not real.
In cinema, disabled characters rarely have a love interest. It's as if, once you're in a wheelchair, your sexuality evaporates. They'd have us believe, but we're less than human. We're undesirable, impotent.
It's hard to love a man whose legs are bent and paralyzed. And the wants and the needs of a woman your age, really I realize. But it won't be long, I've heard them say, until I'm not around. Don't take your love to town.
But in 1978, Coming Home, a film about the transformation of a paralyzed Vietnam vet into an anti-war activist, the last taboo was broken. It was the first film to deal explicitly with a disabled person's sexual expression. But unfortunately, it was the last to present a positive message.
Turn the light on. I want to see you.
What do I do?
Everything. I want you to do everything.
Where can I touch you? What can you feel?
It's nice. I'm real sensitive. All the areas that I feel. Real sensitive there.
The main character, Luke, who's paraplegic, is shown as a very attractive and positive person, and he's really the hero of the film. And the film does have an anti-war theme as well, which kind of is integral, perhaps, to the whole subject of disability there. And there's one scene in particular that I really like, where Luke chains himself to the gates of this military establishment, and he chains the wheelchair as well, and it's like the wheelchair becomes this symbol of rebellion and of defiance, and it becomes a very positive thing, which is to totally in contrast to most films where, you know, it's something very negative and the disabled characters are usually weak people with, you know, bleak lives, hardly worth living.
So far as women are concerned, ever since the historic teaming of Joan Crawford and Bette Davis in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, there's been a steady stream of disabled women in peril scenarios, especially blind women. Wait Until Dark, Blind Terror, Manhunter, Prayer for the Dying, Jennifer 8. The blind woman is the ultimate victim when sexual violence on the screen has become so ritualized that the inability to see the threat of violence becomes erotic. In Jennifer 8, a film about a serial killer murdering blind women, the audience is forced to collude in blatant voyeurism.
Was all from the intruder's position. So as a spectator you identify with the peeping Tom, and Uma Thurman's body was just there on display, and she undresses slowly, and it's sort of built up in this very titillating way, the way she undresses and gets into the bath, and she's blind, she can't even look back, so she hasn't got the power to look back, and you know, it makes her more helpless. So it's just gratifying male fantasies. I think the whole scene was set up to do that, and it was completely unnecessary. It didn't even fulfill any function in the main plot.
I think there are films about women being stalked that keep on being made, leaving the issue of blindness aside. And I suppose blindness, it puts the top on it. It kind of means that the filmmakers can, in a sense, stalk blindness itself.
The reason for that is because it's not only playing with the idea of cinema. After all, you're visually watching something about someone without vision, so that's a kind of little joke within itself. But also, as cinema is predominantly a misogynist, sexist pastime or practice, it just reinforces those gender stereotypes as well. And after all, women are just sort of half disabled anyway. They're sort of one step away from being abnormal, i.e. they're not white middle class men.
Blink is a film about a blind woman regaining her sight while yet another serial killer stalks her. It's another film that repeats sighted people's prejudices against the blind. In this scene, we're asked to believe that despite her confusion, regaining her sight is the most joyful moment of the heroine's life.
Don't expect too much at first. It's just the one eye. Keep your lids closed. We have to see if this eye works before we do the other one. I'm going to open your lids. You have no depth perception now. Here I am.
Oh, Dr. Bear. The actual scene where the doctor takes the bandages off her eyes, and it's all very reasoned at first. You think there is going to be a calmness about it, and then suddenly she's touching his face, and it seems rather over the top under the circumstances. Having said that, one has to reserve judgment, because in a sense, again, that's a situation that I don't know if it's justifiable or not. It might occur. Possibly people do funny things under such circumstances, so I'm not justifying it or not, but the way it was shown on the film, this woman feeling this bloke's face when she got her sight back, just seemed naff in a way.
All the way through the film there are these two male authority figures, the doctor and the detective, who both want Emma to see. And and there's this big emphasis on how she sees and whether she sees well enough. And I think that this can be read as saying that she has to conform to typical feminine ways of behaving. She has to be this passive woman and do as she's told and be a good girl.
The fact that it is placed within a kind of medical sphere, she's in hospital having a cure, whatever, reinforces disability as medical, i.e. the medical model as opposed to the social model. But it also reinforces that disabled people just go through their lives waiting to be cured, and that they're sad if they don't get cured, and that they are deeply overjoyed if they are cured. A lot of people who have been blind are deeply unhappy when they're cured, because they've created an idealised view of the world, and then they see it for what it is. And a lot of them have been driven to suicide just through being able to see.
What I hate most about body fascism in films is the way it manipulates disability to perpetuate lies. It tells us that if you can't be almost normal, you're inferior, a victim, at best a psychotic criminal. I know that isn't true, but films influence people's attitudes to such an extent that most of us don't even recognise what we're seeing. What's more, films affect the way disabled people feel about themselves. I believe it's time we saw something closer to the truth. Perhaps the deaf brother in 4 Weddings and a Funeral points to the way ahead. Played by the deaf actor David Bower, he's an integral part of the narrative and moves the plot along.
What is he saying?
He says, I suspect the groom is having doubts. I suspect the groom would like to delay. I suspect the groom.
What's he saying?
He says he suspects the groom loves someone else.
Do you love someone else? Do you, Charles?
I do.
The characterisation of the deaf brother in 4 Weddings and a Funeral was a much more realistic representation of disability and difference. He wasn't brought on to symbolise something else. His role in the film was as a brother, but whilst on the one hand his deafness wasn't seen as a representation of something else, as a metaphor. On the other hand, it wasn't made invisible. It was a central part of the plot, and in actual fact it was quite a positive thing, because it was his ability to use sign language that enabled him to help his brother avoid a disastrous marriage.
The point about picking out individual characters and saying they're good or they're bad is not really the point. The point about, say, 4 Weddings and a Funeral is that a lot of people, and disabled people especially, have picked out this character and said, this is how it should be. That is what I would consider to be dangerous. Not only because it reinforces normality, but to some extent it reinforces an idea of censorship, that we should only be portrayed in a certain way. I would argue for a multiplicity of representations, good, bad, negative. I'm happy to be portrayed as asexual, as long as I'm also portrayed as sexual, as a deviant, as ordinary, as normal, as a fascist, as a liberal, anything but everything.
Yes, this is a step in the right direction, but filmmakers have a long way to go before we disabled people can begin to feel comfortable with the movies they churn out.